Alright, welcome to this video. In this video we're going to continue factoring with the box method, and we'll just work 4 examples here. I've got 2 here, and then we'll work 2 more later. In this we'll look at some more complicated examples and some situations where you need to do some additional work before you start with the box method, and these first 2 examples will be that way. In this case, we have a negative coefficient for our first term, for our squared term here, and we'll need to work with that before we start the box method. And then over here we've got a negative coefficient on our squared term, but we also have a greatest common factor that we can also pull out of this in order to help us with our factoring there. So let's start with this example. You can see here that we don't have anything that we can factor out as far as a bigger number, but we do need to get rid of this negative right here in front of this first term in order to make the box method work. So we need to factor out a -1. So we factor out a -1, and basically you just change the signs of everything here. So that would give us a positive 2r squared, a negative 3r, and a negative 20. Now we can work with this. We must remember at the very end to put that negative out in front once we get our 2 factors. Okay, so we cannot forget that. Alright, so we've pulled out the -1. Now we're working with 2r squared minus 3r minus 20. So we draw our box, first step. Alright. Next step, we are going to put this term in the first box up here, the upper left box, and the last term in the lower right box. Next step, take the product between these two, so we multiply them together, and that gives us a negative 40r squared for our product. And then we write this middle term, the negative 3r here, and we need a sum for that. So we're going to write our 40r squared here, make a table, and come up with all the factors until we get factors that multiply to negative 40r squared and would sum to negative 3r. Okay, we'll worry about the signs in the end. So let's get started. So we would have 1r and 40r. So that's 41r or 39r when we combine them. So it meets the product requirement but not the sum. So we'll keep working here. So we could have 2r and 20r. Again, that's 22r or 18r when combined, so that's not it. Keep working. 3 won't go into it. 4 will though. 4r, 10r. But that's 14 or 6. So we're getting closer but not there yet. Let's try 5r and 8r. Alright, I think that's going to be it. 8r times 5r is 40r squared, and then if you 8r and 5r would, they are 3 apart, so that's actually going to work. So I'm going to write 5r here. Remember, it doesn't matter where we write either one of these. We could have wrote 8r right here and 5r here. It'll still work out to be the same. Now we need to apply our signs. So our product is negative, so that means one of these must be negative. Our sum is negative, so that means the biggest of these 2 factors needs to get that negative sign. So we'll put that right here. Alright, remember, because we have a negative in this spot right here, then our this term right here will also need to be negative. So the biggest thing we can pull out here then would be a negative 4. Okay, for this column right here, negative 4 is the greatest common factor. Here it would just be an r. So we have one factor, that's r minus 4. R minus 4. I'm going to go ahead now and put this negative out in front. Okay, it's an implied -1. I don't have to write the -1, but remember, when we pulled that negative out in the beginning, we must add it back in here to keep this correct. Okay, the next, for this row right here, that would be a 2r, would be the greatest common factor. And then down here, looks like just a 5. So we'd have 2r plus 5 here. Alright, so our 2 factors here would be r minus 4 and 2r plus 5, and then we have the negative out in front. Okay, alright, I'm not going to check that, but of course you could use the box method to multiply these 2 binomials or put this in Y1 in your calculator and this in Y2 and make sure that the tables match to check that you did it right. But that answer in this case is correct. Okay, let's move on to the next example over here. So here we need to do some work. You can see here that we can pull out a -2 here. We're going to do the negative because that first term has a negative coefficient, so we need to fix that. And then also we have a greatest common factor here between 4, 30, and 36 of 2. So we can actually pull out a -2 in the beginning. And when we do that, we'll be left with because we've got a negative out here, all these signs will change. So that'll be a 2p squared. -2 times 2p squared gives us the -4p squared. Then this will become a -15p. -15p times -2 would give us the plus 30p here. And now this sign also needs to change, so it's going to be a plus. And we're pulling out a 2, so 36 and 2, that would be an 18 here. So 18 times -2 would give us a -36. Okay, now we're ready to work. So we're working with this trinomial right here. We're going to draw our box. Okay, again, these are a little bit more complicated because we've got some extra work to do before we apply the box method. Alright, so first term, the 2p squared, is going in the upper left box. The last term, the constant term, goes in the lower right box. Next step, take the product of these two. So that would be a 36p squared. And then our sum needs to be a -15p. So let's make our table here. Put it down here, and we need a 36p squared, and then we'll work with the signs later. So 36p squared. So that could be a 1p and 36p. Okay, together that's a 37p or a 35p, so we're not there yet. 2 and 18, so 2p and 18p. That gives us 36p squared. Add them together, and that gives us a 20. Subtract them, that gives us a 16. So we're not there yet. Alright, so let's see. Let's look for our next one. So that would be 3. Yeah, 3 will work. 3p and 12p. Alright, looks like that's going to be it. 3p and 12p, that would give us the 36p squared, and then 12 and 3 would give us 15 if we combine them correctly. So I'm just going to put the 3p here and the 12p here. And now we put the sign. So we need to get a -15p out of this when we add them. So and then we need a positive 36p squared. So that either means these two must be positive or both negative. Since our sum is negative, then they're both going to need to be negative. Alright, so done. Notice they're in key locations here. We've got a negative here and a negative here, so that means we're going to have a negative for this term and a negative for this term here when we're done. Alright, so let's get to work here. We can, greatest common factor here can be a -6. -6. Got to write that kind of small. That's for this column here. For this column, it looks like just a p. That's it. That's all we can pull out here. The 2 and the 3 won't. We don't have a greatest common factor between those. So we've got a p minus 6 already identified for one of our terms here, one of our products. Or I shouldn't say that. I should say factor. I'm going to go ahead and remember, it's very important that we put this -2 down here. So I'm going to go ahead and add that so we don't forget it. Now we need to go for our row here and pull out a greatest common factor. That's going to be a 2p. And then down here it will be a negative because we have a negative right here. So a -3. So that's going to give us 2p minus 3 for this last factor. Alright? Okay, so those are done. Now let's look at a couple other examples. I'll pause the video and we'll look at actually some examples that have more than one variable in them and how we can use the box method to work with those. Okay, now we have 2 additional examples. This one right here is a little more basic, and this one right here is a little bit more complicated. So let's get started on this more basic one first. Okay, so first thing we do, we look for a greatest common factor that we can factor out of this trinomial first, and we don't see one. We also look for a negative coefficient for our squared term. We don't have that, so we can just start with the box method. So you can see again that we have two different variables. We have an x and y in this, but that's no problem for the box method. Okay, so we put this first term right here. So we'll write that right there, x squared, and then we write this last term, negative 8y squared, right here. Actually, I'm going to redo that and get rid of that circle there. Negative 8y squared. Okay. Now we take the product of these two, just like always. So that's going to be negative 8x squared y squared. Alright, and then we want the product to be this right here, the sum to be this negative 2xy. So we want a product of negative 8x squared y squared and a sum that is a negative 2xy. Okay, so let's write this. We'll worry about the signs later. So 8x squared y squared. Let's make a little table here. So let's see. That could be a 2x. Well, let's start it this way. 1xy and a 8xy. Okay, that would give us a 9xy or a 7xy when we combine them, so that's not going to work. Product works, but not the sum. Okay, so let's try a 2xy and a 4xy. Okay, that gives us 6 or 2. Okay, so it looks like, yeah, it looks like that will be it right there. 2xy, 4xy. Okay, so let's write these out. 2xy, 4xy. Now let's apply our signs. So our product needs to be negative, so that means one of these must be negative. Our sum is negative, therefore the biggest term, so the negative 4 wins this sign right here. Okay, so we've got our box set up. Now we just pull out the greatest common factor. We have a negative here, so we're going to have a negative right here. Alright, so we've got a negative, and then greatest common factor would be a 4 between 4 and 8, and then we can't pull an x out, but we can pull a y out. Okay, so negative 4y is the greatest common factor for that column. Now for this column, we can pull out an x, and that's it, just an x. So we've got one of our terms identified, x minus 4y. One of our factors identified, x minus 4y. Okay, now we want a row. We want to use this row, so greatest common factor here is just an x again. Alright, so I can go ahead and write that. And then we want greatest common factor out of this row, and that would be a 2 between 2 and 8. It's got to be positive. This term right here is positive. And then we can't pull an x out, but we can pull a y out, so 2y. So we have x plus 2y. Alright, so there we have this factored, x minus 4y times x plus 2y. Let's go ahead and check that real quick. I'm just going to do the arrow method just so we can do this quickly here and check it. So we have x times x, that's x squared. Then we have x times 2y, that's a 2xy. Right there. Now, negative 4y times x would be a negative 4xy. And then negative 4y times 2y would give us a negative 8y squared. Combined like terms, we get an x squared minus 2xy minus 8y squared. And we end with what we started. Let's see, I'm missing my y here. So we x squared minus 2xy minus 8y squared. So we ended with what we started with, so we know that we did it right. Okay, now let's move on to this next example here. This one we need to do some pre-work here. We don't have a negative in front of this first squared term, so we don't need to pull out a negative 1 or anything, but we do have a greatest common factor here. of a 2. We can go ahead and factor out a 2. So let's do that. So we factor out a 2, rewrite it, pull a 2 out of this term. So that's m squared. Remove a 2 from here, or factor out a 2, I should say, from here, and that gives us mn. And then factor out a 2 here, and that gives us a negative 6n squared. Alright, so now we're working with just that trinomial right there, and we're ready to go. So let's draw our box. Make sure to remember to put that 2 in at the very end, okay? We've got to make sure and remember that. Let's draw our box here, finish that. Okay, first term, right here in this box. Last term, right here in this box. Alright, so now we take the product, multiply these two, and we get a negative 6m squared n squared. Alright, and then our sum needs to be this mn right here. So we want a sum of mn. Alright, now let's draw our table. So we'll worry about the signs later. We've got 6m squared n squared. We need that product. So let's draw this out. Okay, so let's see. Let's start with the basic. It could be a 1mn and a 6mn. That's 7 or 5, so that's not going to work. Let's do a 2mn and a 3mn. That looks like that's going to be it right there. Alright, so let's write that 2mn and 3mn. That'll give us our, now we need to fix the sign. So this is, our product's negative, so that means one of these is negative. Our sum is a positive, so that means the largest number wins that positive sign. So the negative sign is going to go right here with this one. Okay, and again, that would give us a negative 6mn squared as our product, and then 3mn plus negative 2mn gives us a positive mn, so our sum also works. Now we've just about got it done. We just pull out the greatest common factors. So we'll start with that column there, and that's going to be, looks like a 3 for the numbers and an n for our variables. That's all we can take out there. Alright, next for this column here, we can take out greatest common factor would be an m. Alright, looks good there. So we have one factor identified, that's the m plus 3n. And remember this 2 right here, we've got to put that there. So go ahead and do that. Let's draw our other parentheses, we're almost done. Greatest common factor for this row is an m. And lastly, we've got a negative here, so remember that negative's got to go there. And we've got a negative 2 that we can factor out with the numbers, and then our variable is just an n. So we have an m minus 2n. Alright, so we have 2 times the quantity m plus 3n times m minus 2n. Alright, so that's factored. Okay, that wraps up this video. We had 2 more complicated examples there, and you can see that the box method did just fine. You had the same steps. We looked for a negative coefficient to start with, then we looked to factor out a greatest common factor from the trinomial before we started, and then we just applied the rules of the box method. Alright, I hope this video helped. Just keep practicing. Remember, math, to become great at it, you just have to practice, just like anything in life. The more you practice, the better you get. Alright, Mr. Howard signing off here. Make sure and subscribe to the videos. Post questions. I want to help you. If you have questions, please post them and I will get back to you on that. If you're in my class, make sure you're practicing this at home and make sure you're ready for the quizzes, and bring any questions that you have to tutorials or to class and we will get those answered. Alright, Mr. Howard signing off. See you in the next video.